Hello everyone, my name is Daniel and I'm a programmer and an artist, and today I've released an update for my geometry node assets, which are available on Gumroad. The update adds some new nodes that I'm calling the build nodes, and the focus of those is around building things, specifically buildings and structures, that sort of thing. Like most of my nodes, the goal is to keep the node or the tool fairly simple and generic so it could be used in a lot of different ways, but to give you an easy way to edit and a lot of flexibility in what you can create with it. Sort of a problem I've been concerned about with some generators I've seen is that they're a little too restricting on your creativity. They either only make one type of building, or there's no interior, or you have to do a lot of work up front to model the components that it uses to build the building, stuff like that. So one of my goals with sort of the take I wanted to have on building generation was I didn't want to make a node that generated a building for you and did all of the work. I wanted to make a node that was a tool that you could use with your creativity to create whatever sort of building you wanted. So with that in mind, I've tried to make all of the tools sort of simple. They do more basic operations, but they give you very easy to use controls so that you can quickly edit a much more complicated mesh. One of the problems I've run into trying to model buildings by hand before is it starts out pretty easy, and then you add some trim or some bevels, and you put a window on the wall, and then you decide, and then now you're stuck. You can't easily move the wall because you don't just have to move the wall, you also have to correct the UVs, and you have to move all of the trim and adjust the window, and the number of things depending on the wall grows over time, and then it becomes difficult to experiment and sort of play with ideas because it's not possible to easily edit it. So the goal with these tools is to give you all of the flexibility you would have modeling something by hand, but to give you some nodes that are tools that allow you to edit the building in ways that are sort of reminiscent of something like The Sims or, a sandbox type game. And then, as I mentioned before, my use case for this is to create assets for my game. So I wanted to make sure it could do low poly things and have UVs and adjust them all, so all of that's supported. But then it also shouldn't be limited to that. Specifically, if you want to make a more high poly mesh, it should still be able to work on that. So, all right, I think that's enough preamble. This building here is something I made with it as a test. There's sort of two parts to this. There's the nodes themselves that are tools that allow you to do certain things, and then there's also sort of a workflow I've developed around the tools, which is how I think the best way to use it is. It's not the only way you can use them, but sort of what I've experimented with. So I have a number of things I want to go through in the next week or two. I want to do this video where I'm going to go over the new nodes and their general description of their purpose. I want to do a video where I build a room and show sort of the workflow I have for how you build something. I have another tool I'm going to release shortly that's sort of a bridge between Blender geometry nodes and Unity. It lets you sort of export prefabs from Blender. So I want to get that finished up and make a video about that. And then I might make some videos about some of the individual nodes as well. That's sort of what I have planned coming up. Let's go ahead and stop this and jump into the source file. These are the new nodes. There's 8 of them. For this video, I'm just going to go through, talk about the settings that you can configure on them, and maybe give a brief description of how you can use them, and then I'll go into more detail in the future. So the first one is Deform Resize. It's more of a utility node that's used by the wall generator and other things. What it does is it allows you to pick an axis and then choose a size, and it'll make the mesh that dimension on whatever axis you picked while keeping the UVs from stretching. So here we have the z-axis picked, and we can see if we make this 4, it will become 4 meters tall. 4 meters tall. And but the UVs don't stretch, so it will sort of like using the correct face attributes option in edit mode. And then the way it does that is it divides the mesh into 2 parts. So it has this as the upper part and this as the lower part. And then it will move the upper part however far it needs to make it the bounding box the size or the height that you picked, and then it will adjust the UVs by the difference. As far as other options, you can choose whether you want to adjust the UVs or not. So if you turn that off, then the UVs will stretch. And then if you do adjust the UVs, you need to know the name of the UV map. And then you pick the axis, X or Y, on the UV map. So that is sort of a limitation. Later, when we get to the building, you'll see if you make a mesh that you're going to deform, the UVs all do have to run in the same direction on all parts of the mesh, which is a bit of a limitation, but haven't thought of a way around it yet. Second, we have deform shear. This is also more of a utility node that's used in the wall generator for corners and stuff. But what it does is it puts a shear on a selection. So in this mesh, I've selected this edge and assigned that to a vertex group. And then you can choose how much you want to shear. And you can also adjust the UVs, which is approximately correct. It's sometimes it does cause a little bit of stretching. Other than that, options, you just choose what axis. So we're applying to the x-axis based on the y-axis. And then you can either calculate the center, or you can use the origin point as the center. Third, we have the main tool that this adds, and that's called Build Walls. What it allows you to do is to take a component mesh, what do you call it? Sort of a modular piece. So you can see I've modeled this. It has UVs. Different parts of this are mapped to different parts of the texture. It has multiple materials on it and stuff. And then it's going to use the deform resize and deform shear to create one of these walls for every face in the input geometry. So you can see here we have, this geometry. It has this one corner that I have at different angles to test the shear setting. And you can see it, no matter what angle you choose, it makes a nice seam there. Just as an example, we can make another part of this here. We can extrude it out on the x-axis. We can add some cuts. And then we can add some more cuts. We can pull this part out. We could put a bevel on here, make this corner rounded. It's, we can flatten this. It just allows you to make a simple mesh, keep it simple and easy to edit, and then it does all of the work for you to build the wall. So you can make multiple different types of these modular pieces. You can see that here. These are all the pieces I used for this. This is the exterior wall, sort of the basement, the interior walls and stuff. This is the foundation piece that goes around the bottom, and then this is sort of at the top of the wall, this sort of crown piece. I tried using it on a roof too. That didn't work so well, but works really good for walls. As far as the modifier options for the Build Walls node, the options you have are the object that you want to instance along the wall. So that's our modular piece here. And then you can choose if you want to auto-rotate or not. That's the vertex sorting deal that we've talked about before on some of the array modifiers. You probably want that on. You can choose if you want to miter the corners or not. If you turn it off, you just get these flat edges. And if you turn it on, it will use the deform shear to make them match up. You have a cutoff for the X and the Y direction. So that's just dividing your modular piece into quadrants, essentially. So by default, it's 0.5, 0.5. So this is the vertical split, and then this is the horizontal split. So any vertices on either side of those lines will move with that side of the resize, essentially. Then there's the option to adjust UVs, which I think you probably almost always want on. If you do that, you need to know the UV name. And then I actually think this UV axis doesn't do anything because it always uses both, but you can swap. If you want the Y to go horizontal and the X to go vertical, you can check swap UV axis. Then there's an option if you want to merge or not. If you turn merge off, you get sort of flat shading because all the edges are split. If you merge, then smooth shading can work. Then there's an option to cut holes. If you turn that option on, it asks you for a collection to cut with. So here I've copied these windows and I put them in a collection I call it example. So if we select the wall and we choose the example collection, then these windows have this cutting cube you can see that goes through them. That cube is tagged with the attribute, a vertex group called bool. So we can just say the cut attribute is bool, and it will use that to cut holes in the wall. So those are all the options on build walls. Then there's build stairs. It lets you take a curve and turn it into stairs. So if we extrude this out, we'll have another one. You can make it straight, you can make it curve, you can make it wider at the bottom. Anything you can do with curves sort of works on it. This has a bunch of different options on it. You can make it low poly, which is sort of your basic stair primitive. If you turn low poly off, it solidifies each part of that. You can choose the height of the stair, like the total height of the staircase. So this is 3 meters. We can make it 5 meters. And then you can choose the size, the depth of each step. So if we made the depth of each step 0.25, we'd have 3 times as many stairs. UV map, you can choose if you want to shade it smooth or not. You can choose if you want to include each of the different parts. So we have the step, kickboard, and the stringer, or the walls. You can choose if you want the stringer to go to the ground or to be like a beam. You can set the materials and all of those different parts separately. Or for the kickboard and the step, you can choose an object to deform. So I have this rounded corner step. We can choose that instead, and then you can see it puts that mesh on in place for the step instead of just solidifying the face. And then there's options to adjust all of that. You can adjust the width of the steps, how far it overhangs off the front. Kickboard, you can make it wider or narrower. On the stringer, you can choose how inset they are, and if you turn off the to ground option, you can choose how thick the beam is, and then or how tall it is, and then how thick it is with the width. So I don't know, this one's a little too complicated, but it gives you quite a few options for ways to make stairs. Next, we have this node that I'm calling the mesh sprite sheet. If you've ever seen a sprite sheet for a game, like this is one I just found on a Google search for a UI. It has like all the different buttons in one texture, and then you map different parts of it with your UVs essentially. So it's that idea, but applied to a mesh. So you can see here I have these different mesh objects. I have this bounds object, and I put each of these windows in one quadrant of that bounds object. And then here on this object, I have 4 faces, and they have a UV map. And the UV map matches this mesh texture that's inside of this bounds. So you can see if I edit this, then a different part of the mesh gets selected. So the idea was that would be a way to select different mesh objects like windows or different greebles that you wanted to put on your walls or something, and then be able to like scatter them, and you can deform and stretch them and stuff like that as well. In the end, I prefer actually using the instance on faces node most of the time, but I left this here because it's pretty cool and probably useful for something. As far as the mesh, as far as the modifier itself, you select your UV, the name of your UV map, and you choose a collection that's going to be your mesh texture or your sprites. And then there's just a couple options to control the depth, or sort of an offset from along the normal of the plane. The face project node is one that seemed like a great idea when I made it, and it works great when you're testing it. But when I was actually making the building, it had some problems, as well as this next node, which is build cut holes. So the idea was that you would make a wall and then you'd put windows or whatever needed to make holes on the wall, and then you would make a new object that was a copy essentially, and you would copy the walls and you'd copy the windows, and in that copy you would actually do the Boolean operation. However, that's kind of a pain because then you can't see on what you're editing the final result because doesn't actually make a hole in the wall there. So you're always going like back and forth between the copy and the original. So I merged the build cut holes into the build walls node so that you could do it all in one place. But when I did that, it creates this sort of circular dependency, whereas if you're trying to project your windows on the wall and then that mesh is trying to cut holes in the wall that it's then trying to project onto so that it can cut holes. You can see how it kind of breaks. So anyway, it works pretty good, but maybe not if you're going to use it on the windows which want to cut holes in the wall. As far as the node itself, all it does is you give it either a collection or an object that it's going to raycast against, and then it takes each face and tries to project it along its normal direction, positive or negative, until it hits something in that object or collection. Build cut holes is merged into the build walls node as well. So if you remember at the bottom of that, there's sort of these options for cutting holes. You can also use it separately. If you use it separately, you choose a wall object. So that's this object in that case. And you choose a cutting object, which is this object in this case. And then you give it the name of the Boolean part of the cutting object. So that's Boolean because all of these windows have this cube cutting object built into them with this bool vertex group assigned to just that part of the mesh. So then what it does is it will separate the window object into two parts, the Boolean part and the other part. It will use the Boolean part to cut holes in the wall, and then it'll merge the actual mesh, the part that you're supposed to see, into the result, sort of joining them together. But like I said, it's actually kind of difficult to work with because your actual building that you're going to like render or export has to be like next to the one that you're editing, and the one that you're editing you can't actually see what you're doing as well because there's not a hole in the wall. You can just see like the window like this. You can kind of see where it's supposed to be, but especially with like doors and stuff, it doesn't quite give you the same feel. And then finally, there's the node that we looked at previously in the preview, which is the instance on faces node. It's basically the same as it was before, but I did actually change it so that it would use material indexes to choose which instance was on which face. So you can see if we turn this off, we have all these different colored faces. And if you duplicate those, that gets copied with the face, obviously. And then this one will be the same instance as this one because they're sharing the same material. And if we chose a different material, you could switch that. To go along as a helper for this node, I actually added an operator to my utilities add-on that can create these materials automatically based on the name of the instances. So the way that works is if we get rid of all the materials and if you have my add-on, you can run this create materials for instances operator, and it will ask you here for a collection name. You type in the name of your collection that you want to instance, and it'll go through all of the objects and create a material for them in the correct order as a placeholder so you can see and know what you want to assign to. So if we want the barred windows, we can assign those to there, and then we can just do the normal window to these, and so on. This node obviously does sort of the same thing as the sprite sheet one. For the sprite sheet one, the result's a mesh, which means you can deform it and stuff, which is pretty cool. The result of the instance on faces node is just an instance of an object. So if we go back to my example scene here, you can see that all of my windows and doors are using the cut holes option to cut the holes, and then you can see they use the instance on faces to make it easy to edit and move them around. And then I mentioned briefly at the beginning, I have another tool I want to release shortly that's a bridge between Blender and Unity for exporting assets, essentially as prefabs. So you can select the windows and then export those as a Blender asset to Unity. And then over in Unity, you can see I have those windows imported, and they're all of the windows are imported as separate objects. And they are all prefabs. And what's cool about that is you can actually go in to edit the prefab, and then you can see, like in this prefab, I added an area light to sort of simulate light shining through the window, and it applies that across all of the windows. If you go back, you can see all of the lights it just added for me. And they all share the same mesh data, which keeps everything light and helps with instancing and frame rates and stuff like that. So that's an overview of my build tools for geometry nodes. These are the 8 new nodes that I've added. I want to make a video shortly where I do a demo and I make a room or something using the tools so you can kind of see my workflow. These are all of my geometry nodes that are available on Gumroad. If you could give me something for them, I'd appreciate that. I think there's over 50 of them now. They all do useful things. And if you can't do that, then they're also available for free. The plan is to make some more videos here, going into detail on them. I think this is pretty much the extent of what I have in mind for my geometry node assets right now. I don't have more ideas for sort of general purpose tool nodes off the top of my head right now. But if you use them to make something cool, feel free to share that. I'd love to see what you do with them, and then I will make some more videos going into detail on sort of the workflow and some of the other, maybe how some of the nodes work, and some of the other tools that I will be releasing shortly. But yeah, that's all I got for this one. Thanks for watching.